Hello everyone, after quite some wait I have finally gotten a Zenitco B-33. So in this video I'm just going to be showing the installation and a first impressions type of review. So let's get started. Taking this out of the bag, we have the main unit itself, the receiver cover. We have a new recoil spring which will help to keep this in place and not lose zero. And then here are the instructions. So without further ado, let's get started. So very first thing I'm going to want to do is get the current receiver cover off of here, and I also need to do a minor field strip taking out a few of the internals, and I already checked this off camera, but it is clear. And we're going to be reusing the spring here that's on the actual recoil spring, though we won't be reusing the internal rod. That is what came with the B-33. I'm also going to be taking these rail covers off because I need to get at these screw holes in here, which you can't very well see right now, but you'll see when they come off here. Just these right here. Now one more thing I want to do before I actually put this receiver cover on the B-33 is I want to compare the weights of the two. So according to Zenitco's paper here that came with it, this is supposed to be 215 plus or minus 10 grams. And as usual, I'll put up some conversions for the imperial system up on the screen. But let's see the difference in weight between the two receiver covers. So it looks like the regular one is about 2.8 ounces, and again I'll do a conversion on the screen. And the Zenitco B-33, which is having a little bit of trouble balancing, looks like we're getting about 6.6. Yeah, so 6.6 ounces. It is definitely heavier, but not very much at all. Right, now getting on with the actual installation. I need to get into this bag here that has the other recoil spring in it, because this also has the mounting screws for the B-33. You should have 4 mounting screws here, which we do. So these mounting screws are going to go through these holes here, which will then interface with the B-10, which this B-33 requires to attach. That's why I bought this B-10 first. It's compatible with any of their lower handguards as far as I'm aware. I could be wrong, maybe there are some that aren't, but what they're going to do is screw in through these 2 holes here. There we go. Hopefully you can see those pretty well on the camera. So it's going to be the exact same on the other side as well. One other thing I forgot to mention is that the rear sight has to be pulled up, and also the gas tube lever has to be pulled up, though we don't have to remove the actual gas tube here. And the one last thing I'll want to do before this can actually go onto the rifle itself to start mounting on is I need to take this screw out, which is holding in this insert right here. Also make sure you don't mix up these 2 screws. So the screw I just took out there has a much shorter size than the mounting screws that I have to use that go into the B-10, or again, whatever lower handguard you're using in your case. So I'm at the stage I can finally put the actual thing on. One thing I noticed, I was trying to dry fit a little bit off camera, and I noticed I was actually having a lot of trouble fitting it with the gas tube on, so I actually ended up taking the gas tube off, and it seems to fit a lot better now. I'm not sure if you have to. It doesn't say you have to take it off in the directions, but it certainly makes it easier, at least in my case. My gas tube's a pretty tight fit. So what we're going to do is right here on both sides there's a little groove, and these grooves are where the legs for the actual B-33 fit in. So what I found is working best for me to get this in is to kind of go in at a bit of an angle. So what I'm kind of doing is I'm actually taking the front part of it and just kind of putting that in first. And then once that sticks, there we go. Then once that sticks, it's pretty easy to just push down on it and it goes right into place. Well, I say right into place. I'm actually going to have to hammer this down a little bit the rest of the way, but pretty much that's easy from here. It's all lined up. It just needs to be pushed down few more millimeters. Next step is to put the insert back into the top here. And to do that, we'll just pull this up, and I'll just kind of, let's see, from this angle it's a bit awkward, but I'll just kind of set it in here from the back, and it just goes right there. Now I read in their instructions they were actually recommending you used thread locker for this, and I will, but I'm just going to install it without it for now just so I can show it, and then later I'll just unscrew it and put the thread lock in then. So same as with those mounting screws from before, just got to set this in, and then I'll just get it in the rest of the way. I actually had to go off camera to get it installed, so what I had to do was I found out it wasn't fitting for me. All you have to do is take the front part, which I'll highlight in a little overlay on the camera here, and it just slides into the rifle here, and then the other side that you can see here, again I'll highlight this on the overlay, this just sits right between where it hinges. Actually I can just show it. So right between where it hinges and where the actual legs are that hold on to the gun. So I'll have cut it out by the time you guys see this, but I had actually put the screws for the leg into the B10 already earlier. Had to take them out to adjust this a little bit so that I could actually get it in place. So yeah, don't put these mounting screws into the B10 to mount everything together yet until you're sure that this little insert that I was just mentioning actually fits. And if it fits, it'll be super easy. I mean, I don't know, I've always heard stories of people having to file stuff on their rifles, but it seems like, yeah, if it just fits in, it should be fine. If it has a little bit of trouble, then this part here is probably a little bit misaligned, which in my case it was. So yeah, definitely make sure you don't put these screws in too early. So it's not too early now, so now I will actually get these put in. I went a little bit out of order originally, but assuming I'm not a Dumbo when it comes to editing, and that I actually have enough footage to work with, you won't even see that part, and it'll all be good. And one telltale sign I kind of should have known was indicating that I didn't have it aligned right, and maybe this will come in handy for some of you as well, is that back here, there's a little, there we go, it's a little notch back here where it sits into this other notch, for lack of a better word. And when I first had it installed, when I had these screws prematurely put in, this part back here was actually hanging over this notch, and I was worried I'd have to actually file it, but no, it turns out I had it wrong the entire time. So now, I thought this 3 times already, but again, I'll have edited it out. Now it's really time to take the recoil spring off, which is a fairly straightforward process, but is a little bit difficult. So I think I'm going to switch camera angles here to show this a bit better. Okay, so this is a really weird camera angle, but I have it set up like this because I'm worried about this recoil spring when I'm taking it off. I have a tendency to lose my grip on these, so I really suspect that this is going to just potentially fly off, and I didn't want that landing into the camera and launching that off into outer space. So what I'm going to do here is I need to pull this down and take the front part of the rod off, and I'll be replacing it with the Zenitco part of the rod. And same thing with the rear, which is the more important part, honestly, because as I mentioned earlier, this is shaped differently than the regular recoil spring. So I'm at an awkward position right now, so I'm going to stand up and hopefully this doesn't fly off. So gotta push this down. Honestly, it would probably be easier if I held it. So pushing this down, and then I'm going to rotate this head out of the way and put everything over to the new assembly. So this is a bit hard to see. I'm going to try to zoom in on the camera, but the end of the recoil spring, or the recoil rod, has a little bit of a split in it. And you actually, I can show it on the new one. It'll make more sense there. But then I just pull the cap off of that, and now for the extremely dangerous part of getting this spring tension released without letting it go flying, which I always have trouble with. And for once, I did it, and it didn't go flying. Incredible. So, here's another good time to show it. So what I was talking about, that split, let me crouch back down here, again in this awkward camera angle. So that split I was referring to is this is your usual recoil guide rod, or recoil rod, whatever, inside the gun, just without the spring on it, of course. And right here is what I was talking about with that split. And this cap, which you can't see at all with my glove, one sec. This cap just kind of hooks onto here, and then it just kind of, there we go. And normally it wouldn't dangle around like this because the spring would hold it up there. So yeah, we'll reuse that on the new recoil spring. So, getting that one put together, just take the front part of the rod and we actually put it in backwards, that way the split can go through. Just like that. My hands are really shaky now because I was holding that spring like that. And then we just, flip it around like that. And now, I'm doing the exact same thing I just showed with that little cap. Well, spring first and then the cap. Now for the joy of doing this all over again. So again, just pushing it down and hopefully not having it fly up like it almost just did there. So with a lot of difficulty, that is finally done. I ended up just doing this off camera. I just had a family member help me out with just holding the spring down. I would definitely recommend, if it's only you doing this, that you try to hurry before you lose your grip on the spring itself. And also, you notice I was wearing gloves when I did this. It turned out to not be that good of an idea because I couldn't get enough dexterity to put the actual end cap on. But at any rate, all is done with only minor injuries sustained. Somehow a spring has managed to hurt me. But all right, so next step, we're going to get back to the rifle. Going to reassemble it here now, and hopefully everything fits well together. When I was waiting to get the B-33, waiting for it to arrive, I was watching some videos on how to install it, and I noticed one video showed a bit of an issue with this part of the recoil spring kind of not going all the way back, and it wasn't allowing the bolt carrier group to go all the way back. So if that's an issue, I noticed in that video the guy just filed it down here at the bottom and that worked. Hopefully I don't have to do any of that. So far I haven't had to do any filing or anything whatsoever, so let's get this put back together. One thing I'm noticing is this gas tube lever sits really close to the actual leg that holds in the B-33. I don't know, I feel like that'll probably be a little bit of an issue. I mentioned this when I was installing the B-10, that I didn't want to have an issue with maintenance and taking the gas tube off easily. I can still easily, well, fairly easily access this, but it'll probably be a little bit tougher than before. I'm definitely noticing it's partially covered. Having a hinged receiver cover is nice. It makes it way easier to disassemble. So now the moment of truth is if everything will lock up properly. So I thought it was sticking a little bit, but I guess it was my imagination. I pulled up the receiver cover, and it's kind of hard to hold it back like this and show the camera at the same time, but it is going all the way back. Last thing, and then I'll get out to the range, is I need to put an optic onto this. So I have an AR I pretty much never use anymore. I had a primary arms ACSS mounted to it, and I have already put that here onto the AK. And I was messing around with this a bit off camera, and I noticed it is a little bit difficult. I was worried this might be an issue, and yeah, I have to pretty much get a chin weld rather than a good cheek weld just to be able to see through it, because it's pretty high up there. But we'll find out how that actually works when we actually get out to the range, which I think will be the next thing. So see you all in that next part. Once I got out to the range, the first thing I did was zero the optic, but I did that off camera since that's a rather boring process. And afterwards, I shot from a few different positions, and I was trying firing from my left shoulder and my right shoulder. I fired several magazines, and so far I haven't noticed any wobble or shifting in the point of impact of the ACSS that I have mounted on the B-33. What I did notice, however, is the chin weld, as I suspected it would be. It is very, very uncomfortable to shoot from. It isn't a huge issue, since this is just a 5.45. I have a DTK3 on the end, and with the scope and everything I have on here, it's about 11 pounds, so all that together, there's pretty much no recoil. But I could see this being extremely uncomfortable if mounted on a 7.62 39 or other calibers of AK. Okay, so now that we're back from the range, there was a few things I wanted to cover with the rifle. First of all, there hasn't been any more wobble. This is still a very sturdy lockup. If I can prop it here, there's no movement in the B-33 itself at all. However, if you do have an issue with wobble, they actually offer a telescopic recoil spring. I wanted to get it with this, but I may actually end up not getting it all because I'm not having any issue with wobble. But we'll see how it holds up in the future. One other thing I noticed when I was out at the range with this is there's a little bit of a gap between the safety here and the receiver cover itself. That could let in a little bit of dust, but it's a really, really small gap, as you can see, but it is something to think about for sure. And then one more thing you may have noticed, this is something I just put onto the rifle after I came back from the range. I haven't shot with it yet because I haven't gone back out, but I put a cheek riser back here. I'm going to try that out next time I go to the range. Ideally, it should help with the whole chin weld issue I was mentioning, or hopefully get it back down to being a cheek weld. Another thing I checked, although I didn't shoot with it, was an EOTech, because you see those a lot used on these Zenitco B-33s, and I actually was having the same issue I was having with this ACSS here, where I have to put my cheek way up, and I'll put up some footage here so you can see that, but pretty much the exact same position I had to put my chin into. So I'm looking into getting some lower scope mounts for this, or possibly some other sight altogether, but at the moment I'm still looking. But that's less an issue with the B-33 itself and more of an issue with what scope you choose to buy, though it is certainly something to keep in mind because it's pretty likely you'd have that problem. Unlike ARs, you already have such a high amount of space here between the Picatinny rail where the scope will sit and your stock, compared to an AR, which is pretty much just straight back from the barrel. Next, I want to talk about a few alternatives to the B-33. So in my case, I chose this B-33 because it doesn't replace the rear iron sight here. Prior to this, I owned a TWS dogleg, and the issue with it that I didn't like was that the way it installs is it goes, I'll show a kind of overlay here, but it kind of hooks in, and the pivot point and the lockup point is right here. It takes the place of this rear sight blade, which I didn't like. I like the stock AK iron sights because they're elevation adjustable, which is quite nice, but you lose that ability if you switch to the TWS dogleg, and then you just have to get some sort of backup iron sight, and it isn't as good as having an actual elevation adjustable iron sight. However, one consideration in buying a B-33 versus a TWS dogleg, or even other options like the FAB Defense PDC or various side mounts that are out there, but just focusing on the TWS for now, this B-33 is $260, or at least from Ivan Tactical, which is where I purchased it from, it's $260. If you choose the TWS dogleg, though, at least today when I checked it earlier, it was $170 to buy from there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's the FAB Defense PDC. I don't know how good or bad that one is. It looks like, from what I've seen of it, that it kind of locks in back here. There's some sort of tension that you can tighten in. It looks like it's on the recoil spring, or maybe it's just at the rear of the receiver that it locks in. I'm not too sure. But that one costs $206. And then for a good side mount, you're looking at about $100 to $140. Again, I don't have any experience with the PDC, the FAB Defense, so I can't recommend or not recommend that one. But the reason I steered clear of a side mount is I like being able to fold this stock. Granted, when I have this cheek riser on here and the sling, I can't fold it, but normally I really like to fold it But you can't do that on a side folding stock if you have a side mount mounted on there. So that's why I steered clear of that option. Although on that note, Zenitco also offers a side mount. And yeah, there's tons of good ones out there. RS Regulate, Midwest Industries, the list goes on and on. There's a ton of side mounts available for the AKs. And they're probably the cheapest option of everything I mentioned. If you have something like a Wasser 10 like I have here, or just any sort of regular non-folding, just solid stock, it might be a good option because your stock won't fold anyway, so you may as well make use of this side mount. And as I said, they are cheaper and they are just as good in terms of how tight they lock up, though, of course. Then there's a few other maintenance sort of issues you might want to consider if you go with a side mount. For example, it's a little bit harder to take the receiver cover off compared to TWS, as I mentioned earlier, that hinges just like this B-33 I have here. And again, I'm not sure on the PDC, the FAB Defense, but I believe that the FAB Defense kind of just, you adjust the tension and it just kind of comes off, which isn't too bad. So in my past videos, I haven't really ever made explicit recommendations on things I'm reviewing. I just kind of want to give my opinion on them and kind of have them as things to consider. But I don't know, maybe you guys will like that. If you hate it, I'll stop doing it. But in the case of this B-33, I would definitely recommend it. I don't have any issues with it so far. The only downside I can possibly think of is the price point. As I mentioned, this is probably the most expensive mounting option for optics that I know of for the AKs. But in my opinion, it is 100% worth the price. So with that, thank you all for watching. I hope you found this informative, and I will see you all in the next one.